The Eifel, Southwest Germany, 1979. The soft hills and dark pine forests of this region have supported one of the oldest ceramics traditions in Europe since the late Middle Ages. The local word for the potters of this area is Krug Becker, jug bakers. The village of Speicher sits among these hills. 3,000 people, a church above the rooftops. At the end of a village street, the Töpferei Wilms-Thiel stands behind a long stack of firewood. Not decoration, fuel. Those logs will fire a kiln that holds 12,000 liters of pottery at temperatures exceeding 1,200 degrees Celsius. The courtyard opens onto a massive, soot-blackened brick structure. That is the kiln. It has just completed a firing. The doors have been sealed for days. Today, they open it. During every firing, the kiln entrance is sealed completely. Fire brick and a sand-clay mixture close it off. The seal holds through 3 days of climbing temperature. It holds through 1,200 degrees Celsius. It holds through the hours of salt glazing. After 8 days of cooling, a worker begins to unseal it, one brick at a time. He does not rush. The pottery at the back of the kiln is still warm. The workers who go inside will need gloves. As each brick comes away, the dark interior opens. The fired pottery is visible inside. Gray, brown, salt-glazed. Some of these pieces have not seen daylight since the kiln was loaded. They went in as raw clay. They come out as stoneware. A kiln that holds 12,000 liters does not unload itself quickly. Workers carry pieces out in baskets and by hand. Until the early 20th century, this work was done by family members. Today, it is the workshop staff. Inside the kiln, the stacking system reveals itself. Every cubic centimeter has been used. Smaller vessels were fired inside cylindrical protective capsules called kapseln. The capsules shield the delicate wares from direct contact with the salt gases during the glaze cycle. Between rows, flat ceramic dividing plates. On the floor and between stacks, rough clay spacer pads called plots or schaben. These hand-formed fragments prevent the pieces from fusing together during the firing. Without them, the kiln load becomes a single mass. At the top row of the kiln stand the largest pieces, the Bartmannskrug jugs, 5 liters capacity. They sit on the top tier without protective capsules because they are the special pieces, the ones this workshop is known for. A worker lifts one from the highest shelf. He brings it into the light. The face looks back. A bearded man, stylized, molded by hand. The tradition of putting this face on a jug goes back to the 16th century. The original production centers were Cologne, Langerwehe, Westerwald, and especially Frechen in the Rhineland. Between 1500 and 1800, the Bartmannskrug was a functional vessel, a Schank- und Trinkgefäß, a serving and drinking jug. The bearded face looked up at whoever drank from it for 300 years. Then it disappeared from everyday production. In the 1960s, a nostalgia wave brought it back. Potteries began producing historical forms that had no modern function. The Bartmannskrug was one of them. Wilms-Thiel added it to the production line as a purely decorative piece. Today, the Southwest Eifel version is sold exclusively as a decorative object. The function that created it no longer exists. The tradition continues because of that function's memory. The warehouse fills with the batch. Blue-gray jars with cobalt floral designs, kitchen vessels, storage containers, and in one corner, set apart from the utility ware, the Bartmannskrug jugs in their own cluster. Until the Second World War, the main production here was functional household pottery, milk storage, food preservation. Today, it is art, made by the same hands, in the same kiln, using the same fire. The bearded face has survived 5 centuries because of what happens to the clay in that kiln. The brown skin of the fired jug is not painted on. It is the result of chemistry. At peak temperature, 1,200 degrees Celsius, sodium chloride is thrown directly into the open kiln chamber. The sodium bonds with the molten quartz on the vessel surface. It forms a glass layer, salt glaze, permanent, integrated into the clay itself. Not applied after firing, grown during it. Without the salt, the stoneware would emerge dull and porous. With it, sealed, hard, and reflective. Inside the workshop, 3 people are working at the same time. Frau Wilms, the owner, works a raw clay jug at the turntable. Herr Knötgen runs the electric wheel on the left. Frau Schwall casts face medallions at the center bench. 3 stages, 1 workshop, running in parallel. Frau Wilms cuts a length of clay rope from the stock. She rolls it smooth between her palms. She presses one end firmly to the neck collar of the raw jug. She draws the arch outward and down, attaches the lower end to the shoulder with one sweep of her thumb, finishes the joint with a wet sponge. Handle making was traditionally women's work in Eifel potteries, not assigned by rule, acquired through generations of practice. The sponge passes, the seam disappears. The jug looks as though it was born with a handle. It was not. It was built in 30 seconds. Herr Knötgen comes from Nierbach, another Krug Becker village in the Eifel, a place where pottery was not a trade but a lineage. He activates the foot lever of the electric wheel. The clay spins. He dips both hands in water and centers the mass. This is the step that determines everything that follows. A wheel that is not perfectly centered cannot produce a vessel with uniform walls. The hands find the center by feel, not by measurement. He opens the clay with his thumbs. He draws the walls upward. The cylinder climbs in smooth, continuous passes. The clay must be 2 things simultaneously: supple enough to move under pressure, stiff enough to hold once that pressure stops. Too wet, the walls collapse. Too dry, they crack under the pull. Herr Knötgen finds that balance without measuring it. His hands find it because they have found it hundreds of times before. He picks up the Wirkspan, the wooden rib tool, and presses it against the spinning outer wall. The surface smooths. The belly curves outward. He squeezes the top of the cylinder inward with both hands. A neck forms, then a slightly flared rim. The wheel stops. A thin wire is drawn under the base. The jug separates. He lifts it with dry hands and sets it on the Wirkspan alongside the day's other work. Frau Schwall makes the face. She rolls a clay slab flat on the canvas table and lays it over one of the plaster mold blocks. The molds were made by a sculptor in Trier. Each one is a negative impression of a bearded face, 10 by 15 to 15 by 20 centimeters, capturing a stylized Renaissance portrait that was standard across Germany in the 16th century. She presses the clay into the carved cavities with her thumbs: hair, beard, eyes, the closed downward mouth, every groove filled, every detail transferred. She skims the back flat with a metal scraper. She cuts the flash at the borders with a Drahtschlinge, a wire loop. Then she rolls a small clay pellet and presses it to the center of the backing. This is the pull handle. She grips it and lifts the entire cast medallion cleanly away from the plaster. The face looks back. Beard splayed symmetrically, wide-set eyes, that closed expression. The origin of this face has never been settled. Theories have ranged from a pagan deity to a symbolic figure representing whoever drinks from the vessel. None have been confirmed. What is known is that the motif spread across Europe in the 1500s, carried by copper engravings and woodcuts. Potters in the major Rhineland stoneware centers copied what they saw. The face became standard production for 300 years. Then it disappeared. Then it came back. Frau Schwall lays the fresh mask alongside the others. She prepares the next one. The plaster mold collection on the workshop shelf holds several versions of the same face. Each one captures a different expression from the Renaissance tradition. Different proportions, different beard styles, all descended from the same line of craftwork. When a jug has dried to leather-hard state, approximately 2 days after throwing, Frau Schwall prepares it for the face. She paints liquid slip onto the back of the medallion, Schlicke, water-thinned clay, the traditional bonding agent. She positions the medallion on the neck of the jug, directly opposite the handle. She presses the edges flat with her thumbs. Firm, even pressure across the entire perimeter. Then, the sponge. She wipes around the border of the attached face, pulling away the slip that has squeezed out from the joint. The transition between medallion and vessel wall disappears. She rotates the turntable and checks alignment from the front. This is the moment the jug becomes a Bartmannskrug. Before this step, it was a jug. After this step, it carries a face that has been on vessels in the Eifel and the Rhineland since 1500. The shelf holds an entire batch, every face pointing in the same direction, every beard the same width, thrown by one person, assembled by another, fired by a third. Before a Bartmannskrug goes into the kiln, it receives its color. A worker sprays iron oxide solution over the dry clay surface. The gray clay transforms instantly, dark brown, almost purple under the spray booth light. The iron oxide penetrates the unfired surface. At kiln temperature, the iron bonds permanently into the stoneware structure. After firing, the Bartmannskrug will be a deep, warm brown, not painted on after the fact, fired in. The blue-gray vessels in the warehouse received cobalt before firing for the same reason. The color comes from the mineral. The kiln makes it permanent.
The final stage is fire. In the traditional wood-fired kiln, a stoker feeds long timber slats through the fire portals for hours. The temperature climbs past 1200 degrees Celsius, that is over 2200 degrees Fahrenheit. Black smoke pours from the exhaust holes above the roofline. At peak heat, the salt goes in. Coarse sodium chloride shoveled directly into the white-hot chamber. The chemical reaction is immediate. Vapors explode outward from the opening. This is how the glaze forms. Not brushed on, not dipped, thrown into fire and chemically grown onto the surface of every vessel inside. Frau Wilms polishes the finished face one last time before it goes on the shelf. Because once these skills are gone, the throwing, the mask, the salt, and the fire, all that remains is the record. Subscribe. More of these trades are coming.